Imagine being a queen in the Middle Ages. The crown rests heavy on your head, your robes glitter with jewels, and every eye in the court is fixed on you. But beneath all the pomp and ceremony, your worth is measured by one single thing: your ability to give birth to a son. Not a daughter, not a frail infant who might not survive the winter, but a strong male heir, a boy who could inherit the throne, lead armies, and continue the dynasty. Without him, you were nothing. Queens were raised to think of themselves as symbols of power, but in reality, they were prisoners of their wombs. The throne, the dynasty, the survival of a kingdom itself, all came to rest on their bodies. And when the body failed, when the months turned into years with no pregnancy, or when only daughters were born, punishment followed. Sometimes it was quiet humiliation, whispered rumors in the court, rival mistresses flaunted in their faces. Other times it was much more brutal: forced divorces, public disgrace, exile, and in some cases, even death. The cruel irony was that infertility was rarely understood. In an age without medical knowledge, the blame always fell on the queen, never on the king. The king could have countless mistresses and father illegitimate children, yet if his wife failed to bear him a son, she was branded barren, and that label could destroy her life. Before we walk into those royal chambers and look into the eyes of the women who endured this fate, let me ask you, where are you watching from tonight? Comment below. I love knowing where history is finding you in the world. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed, because the stories we uncover here are the ones most history books leave buried. So tonight, we'll step into the lonely world of queens who could not give birth. We'll see how their husbands turned against them, how courts whispered about them, how political rivals used their barrenness as weapons, and we'll see what punishment meant in a world where power was inherited, not earned. This is not a story of medicine. It is a story of power, of women crushed under the weight of expectations, and of the cruel brutality of a system that made their bodies the battleground of dynasties. And our journey begins with one of the most infamous queens in all of history, a woman whose inability to give her king a son changed the course of England forever. Catherine of Aragon arrived in England as a young bride, married first to Prince Arthur, and later, after his death, to his brother Henry VIII. For years, she lived as the very picture of queenship, dutiful, devout, and fiercely loyal. But all of that loyalty could not protect her from the one fate she could not escape: repeated pregnancies that ended in heartbreak. Catherine endured at least 6 pregnancies. Some ended in stillbirths, others in children who lived only a few days. Only one survived: a daughter, Mary. To the world, that daughter was a miracle. To Henry, it was a failure. For Henry VIII did not want a girl. He wanted a boy, an heir who could carry his name and secure his dynasty. At first, Catherine's suffering drew sympathy. She prayed, she wept, and she kept trying. But as the years dragged on and no son came, Henry's patience grew thin. His eyes wandered, and soon the whispers began. Perhaps the queen is cursed. Perhaps God has closed her womb. Henry's punishments were not physical, but they cut deeper than a blade. He paraded mistresses before her. He humiliated her in court. He told the world that their marriage had been sinful, cursed, because she had once been married to his brother. And eventually, he demanded the ultimate punishment: not her life, but her crown. Catherine fought back. She stood in court, proud and defiant, refusing to accept that she was less of a wife or queen because she bore only a daughter. But her protests meant little. Henry cast her aside for Anne Boleyn, and Catherine spent the last years of her life exiled from court, separated from her daughter, forbidden even the dignity of being called queen. Her only crime was her body's failure to give the king what he wanted. And in that failure, Catherine's punishment became the spark for one of the greatest upheavals in history, the English Reformation. Henry VIII's second queen, Anne Boleyn, seemed at first to be everything Catherine was not. Young, clever, alluring, she promised Henry passion and, more importantly, sons. She risked everything for the crown, endured scandal, and became the most hated woman in England, all to sit beside Henry as his queen. But once again, nature betrayed them both. Anne became pregnant several times, but only one child survived, a daughter, Elizabeth. That daughter would one day become one of the greatest monarchs in English history. But at the time, she was not what Henry wanted. When Anne miscarried a male child, the whispers began again. Perhaps God does not want Henry to have a son. Henry, restless and cruel, began to see Anne not as his salvation, but as his curse. And unlike Catherine, Anne would not simply be set aside. Her punishment was far more brutal. Accused of treason, adultery, and even incest, charges that were almost certainly fabricated, Anne was dragged to the Tower of London. There, she was stripped not just of her crown, but of her life. Her so-called failure to give Henry a son became the weapon her enemies used to destroy her. And when the sword fell on that May morning, it was not only Anne's neck that was severed, it was the truth that a queen's worth could ever exist beyond her womb. England was not alone in this cruelty. Across Europe, queens lived under the same shadow. In France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, everywhere, the pattern repeated. In Castile, Queen Isabella of Bourbon gave birth only to daughters, and when she died young, she was quietly replaced, her memory overshadowed by the son-producing queens who followed. In France, Queen Margaret of Valois was humiliated for years, her marriage annulled after she failed to conceive. Even in Russia, centuries later, Tsarinas were judged first and foremost by their ability to provide heirs. Entire empires trembled when an heir was not produced. Dynasties ended, wars began, treaties collapsed, all because a queen's body did not deliver what was demanded of it. And yet, these women were often innocent of the blame laid upon them. Infertility could just as easily come from the man. But kings were shielded by power and pride, while queens bore the punishment. Their suffering was public, their humiliation etched into history, while the men who condemned them were free to remarry, to try again, to discard wives like worn garments. What do we learn from these stories? At first glance, they seem like relics of a crueler age, punishments from a time when science had not yet untangled the mysteries of childbirth. But beneath the surface, they reveal something deeper, the way power has always demanded sacrifices, and how often those sacrifices were women. The queens who could not give birth were punished not just for failing their husbands, but for failing entire kingdoms. Their bodies became symbols of stability, of divine favor, of legitimacy itself. And when those symbols cracked, when no heir was born, the punishment was swift, brutal, and often final. Some queens endured exile, others endured execution. Many were forgotten altogether, their names remembered only as footnotes beside the kings who cast them aside, and yet their suffering reshaped history. Without Catherine of Aragon's disgrace, there would have been no Anne Boleyn. Without Anne's execution, Elizabeth might never have ruled. Without these so-called barren queens, the course of nations might have turned entirely different. So the next time you hear the stories of kings and battles, remember the women who were punished not for what they did, but for what they could not give. Their silence still echoes through history's halls, a reminder that power has always carried a price, and too often it was women who paid it.